The wind howled across the open prairie, slicing through the bare trees and rattling the loose boards of the Thatcher homestead. As 15-year-old Caleb Thatcher stepped into the freezing dusk with a half-empty lantern and a heart too soft for the world he'd been born into, his boots crunching through the frost-layered grass as he crossed the fields to check the outer traps. But before he could reach the tree line, he stopped, breath hitching in his throat, because there, just beyond the edge of the fence where the land dipped into a hollow, lay a small, broken shape curled into itself like a bird with clipped wings, and as he moved closer, heart pounding, he saw her, a native girl, no older than he was, barely dressed, feet bloody and raw, face bruised and lips cracked, clutching a leather pouch to her chest as though it held the last of her soul, her breath so faint it might have been the wind itself. And for a long moment Caleb just stood there, torn between fear and something deeper, a pull in his chest that felt older than reason, older than blood, before he dropped to his knees beside her, whispering, "You're all right, you're all right." Though he didn't believe it, didn't know if she was breathing or slipping away right there in the dirt, and then without thinking he pulled off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders, and when she flinched he stilled, hands open, whispering again, softer this time, as if trying to coax life back into her bones, then carefully gathered her up, her weight feather light and frightening, and carried her not to the house but to the barn, because he knew his father would ask questions with his fists and his mother wouldn't even ask, just stare through the girl like she wasn't there. So he laid her gently in the straw of the far stall, tucked his coat around her, and lit the small oil lamp that hung from the post, the flickering light casting long shadows on the beams overhead. And for the next hour he worked in silence, fetching water, tearing cloth for her wounds, breaking his last piece of cornbread and placing it beside her, though she hadn't stirred once. And when he sat back breathing hard, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow, uncertain rhythm, he realized he didn't even know her name, didn't know if she'd wake at all, but he whispered anyway. Stories about the coyote he'd seen last spring, the hawk that circled above the well, the sound of his mother's voice before it grew cold like the winters that never seemed to end. And sometime past midnight, when the wind had quieted and the stars burned sharp and clean above the barn's broken roof slats, her eyes opened, slow and unsure, and she looked at him, not with fear, but confusion, and her lips moved but no sound came, until finally she rasped a single word, "Asha," and he said it back, unsure if it was her name or someone else's, but she nodded faintly. And in that moment something passed between them, something soft and solemn, like a prayer given breath, and from then on, he returned every few hours, feeding her sips of water, wrapping her in every spare scrap of cloth he could find, tending to her bruises, whispering words she didn't always understand. And as her strength returned, so too did the color in her face and the fire in her eyes, and by the third morning she could sit up, could hold the cup herself. And when she spoke again it was clearer, her voice still hoarse but filled with a kind of quiet defiance as she told him she had escaped, that men with red sashes had taken her from her people, beaten her, traded her like a thing, and that she'd run for 2 days through snow and silence before collapsing near his land. And Caleb, who'd never been brave in his own mind, who had always stayed quiet when his father drank and shouted, felt something shift inside him, like a spark lit beneath the ribs, and he told her she was safe now, though he wasn't sure it was true, especially not when he saw the footprints near the well that afternoon, large and deep, too fresh to be from anyone in the family. And that night he didn't sleep, sitting near the barn window with the rifle his grandfather had left him and eyes fixed on the hills to the north, where shadows moved when the moon rose and the trees shifted without wind, and at dawn, when the sky blushed with early light and frost clung silver to every blade of grass, he saw them, riders one by one stepping into view on the ridge like ghosts summoned by memory. Not a dozen, not even 50, but hundreds. 500 by his count, mounted in silence, braids catching the wind, feathers swaying. Eyes fixed not on the house, not on the barn, but on him. The boy standing outside, heart hammering, unsure if he'd done something holy or foolish. And then one rider broke away. A tall man wrapped in fur and leather, face lined by age and grief, his hair streaked with ash gray, riding a pale horse that moved like smoke, and he approached slowly, deliberately, dismounting only a few feet away and lowering himself to one knee. Not to Caleb, but to Asha, who had stepped from the barn behind him, standing barefoot in the frost, wrapped in Caleb's patched blanket, her face solemn, proud, and full of something he'd never seen before. Power. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that returns to itself. And as the man reached for her, she stepped forward and placed her fingers on his brow, and he whispered in a language Caleb did not know, and then rose, turned to the ridge, and raised one hand, and as if pulled by a string, the entire line of warriors dismounted, kneeling in unison, 500 hearts beating in time with the land, not for vengeance, not for violence, but in reverence for her, for the act of saving her, for the boy who had given warmth without asking for her name. And in that moment Caleb felt something crack open in the world, something older than nations, something deeper than fear. And when Asha turned to him and smiled, small but sure, he understood that this story would live beyond them, that it would be carried on horseback and in prayer, in firelight and in storm for generations to come. And though she left with them, mounted behind the elder, her fingers brushing Caleb's as they parted, he did not cry, did not call out, only watched until the last rider vanished into the trees. And for days afterward people came, strangers on foot, settlers from the next county, even a preacher who had heard rumors of a miracle. And all Caleb could say was that he gave a blanket, and that the rest had always belonged to her.